Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third session in our series, ushering in the ecological reign in our Naturenomic dialogue series. This has been our attempt to bring our platform online, the Eastern Himalayan Naturenomics Forum, and now we've had two sessions so far in which we've discussed how social policy and how businesses can help and push forward India and the Eastern Himalayas in creating a circular economy which enhances environmental restoration. In the previous session, we discussed a lot of different topics such as moving from a mindset of corporate social responsibility to environmental social responsibility, the need to move to completely green urbanization, and the need especially for businesses to invest in forest landscape restoration. We ended the session on a very topical question about technology, about the maturity of technology being used in conservation, how effectively and with what level of optimization is it being deployed today. So today's session is a response to that, and we'll explore how technology can plug in some of the critical gaps in conservation today, whether it's in the arena of monitoring, financing, or community participation, and whether or not technology can help transition to a model of conservation that is grassroots up, with communities taking a leading role as stewards of their natural assets. We are extremely delighted to have a very eclectic panel with us, Dr. Kamal Bawa, Mr. Ramadorai, Dr. Anish Andheria, Dr. Bramley Lindo, and Dr. Irina Fedorenko, who will share their insights on this topic. They come from very disparate backgrounds, but I think they are all united by technology, whether they're applying it in the workspace or if they love it or if they're using it for conservation. And I thank them for being here with us to lead this discussion. I thank all the attendees for joining us today, and thank you to our 23,000 followers watching this live on Facebook. We will be accepting a total of 5 questions for the panelists, and we request you to put all your questions in the Zoom Q&A box you see on your screen, or in the comments on Facebook, where a team member will pass it on to us. If you have a question that you want to be directed to a specific panelist, we request you to please put the name of that panelist next to that question. Tell us who you want it to be directed to so that we can pass it on to them directly in the Q&A session. We will do our best to answer all your questions live, but if we don't, please be assured that we will be passing them on to our panelists to share their thoughts at a later date. So without further ado, I want to introduce our moderator for today evening. Dr. Kamal Bawa is an evolutionary ecologist, conservation biologist, and a distinguished professor of biology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He is also the founder of the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. And he was the recipient of the first Gunneris Sustainability Prize in 2012 and the 2016 International Midori Prize in Biodiversity. He is an elected fellow of the Royal Society London and the American Philosophical Society, the world's 2 oldest learned academies. Over to you, Dr. Bawa.
Thank you, Joanna, and good evening, distinguished panelists and participants in this webinar organized by the Balipara Foundation. I have had the privilege of being associated with the Balipara Foundation for a number of years, and I think we are all very, very grateful to the foundation for organizing this wonderful series of webinars. I think we all know the power of technology, the power which we experience every day in our lives. For many of us, digital technology has also ushered a new era of informatics and data analytics that allow us to assemble and organize information remotely at various scales. And as we have all seen during this crisis, This new information in turn drives meaningful action as well as policies in response to societal and environmental challenges. We are very fortunate today to have 4 outstanding panelists to provide us their insights to the role technology can play in conservation. Our first panelist, Mr. Ramadorai, is the former CEO and Vice Chairman of Tata Consultancy Services, also known as TCS, and for making TCS a leading global giant in information technology. He has also served as a chairman of National Skill Development Agency, as well as the National Skill Development Corporation. And both these corporations seek to transform the lives of millions of people, millions of young people, I should emphasize. Currently, Mr. Ramadorai serves as chairman of AirAsia, Tata Advanced Systems, Tata Technologies. I think I could go on and on, but I want to note here that Mr. Ramadorai has been very well recognized for his services to the corporate world, to the civil society, to the government. He was awarded the Padma Bhushan, India's third highest in 2006, and in 2000 he was awarded the CBE, that is Commander of the Order of the British Empire, by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Our second panelist is Dr. Anish Andheria. He is the president and CEO of World Wildlife Conservation Trust, a not-for-profit organization that works in more than 160 national sanctuaries throughout India, 3 states. Thus, he has immense knowledge of wildlife, particularly predator-prey interactions. That is his personal interest. He's author of 2 books in wildlife, and Mr. Andheria is a member of several government committees, including the National Tiger Conservation Authority, State Board of Wildlife of Maharashtra, and again, I could go on and on, but I want to note here that he's also a recipient of the prestigious Carl Zeiss Award in Conservation and the UAA Institute of Chemical Technology Distinguished Alumnus Award. So welcome, Mr. Andheria. Our third panelist is Dr. Irina Fedorenko. She's a co-founder of Biocarbon Engineering, now known as Dendra Systems. And Dendra Systems had been using drones and other emerging technologies for land restoration efforts around the world. She's also the co-founder of Kindness Collective that supports women farmers in India through social enterprises in organic detergents. She currently serves as Business Development Director for Earthbanc, that is aimed at revolutionizing green banking and investment. Our fourth and final panelist is Dr. Bramley Lindo, the founder and CEO of Worldview Impact Foundation. He's a climate change and sustainable development professional with over 20 years of experience in climate change adaptation projects that integrate agroforestry, regenerative farming, sustainable tourism, and renewable energy. His previous assignments have included work with the United Nations and the World Bank throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America, working with governments, IGOs, NGOs, and the private sector to alleviate poverty and foster sustainable development. Amazing group of people. I'm going to start with posing two questions, and each speaker will have 8 minutes, and then hopefully we will have some time to go for another round of questions, and finally we will have questions. We'll finish all this in the remaining, I would say, 48 minutes. So Joanna is going to keep time, and I would urge the panelists for the first round of questions to devote perhaps 7 minutes, and then we will have another round of questions. So the first two questions, each question comes in two forms. How can technology facilitate remote conservation while strengthening local leadership and capacity? And how can digital platforms bridge the gap between conservationists and communities for real-time information sharing? So that is the first question. The second one is, what are the intractable problems of conservation and habitat management that technology can solve, particularly in the areas of monitoring, community management, and ownership? So I will ask Mr. Ramadorai to start, and perhaps I would urge the speakers to make a few introductory comments or whatever they want to say, and then perhaps they devote the latter half of their comments to addressing the two questions. Mr. Ramadorai, welcome. We look forward to hearing from you.
The area of the protection and conservation of the biodiversity itself, which includes ecosystems, are the cornerstones of sustainable environmental development. And this is also addressed in the 2030 agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals 15, which talks about life on land to protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage the forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt the biodiversity loss itself. I think the pressures that are happening because of the climate change and the ecosystems loss and wildlife crime are threatening biodiversity and wildlife around the globe. This is not an India problem, it's not an Eastern Himalaya problem, but it is across the board, across the world, where everybody is grappling with. So the technology, because the information technology, as it integrates with the domains, whether they are commercial domains or domains like what we are talking about, conservation, has become extremely important, and it has evolved over a period of time, starting from basic automation of the offices of the people who conserve to really sophisticated technologies being deployed on the ground. So the advances of the technology and the application of the technology to a number of areas, whether it pertains to big data crunching, deriving useful metrics, artificial intelligence, building robot hardware that can operate under very tough natural conditions where the human beings find it difficult to go, are the broader applicability as we see it. It's not good for wildlife, nor it's not only good for earth wildlife habitat, but I think in a way it's good for technology itself. I think the conservationists, coming to your questions, the conservationists have adopted the technology and they are beginning to grow with the technology, and they adopt what we call as the digital conservation in a big way from the traditional ways. And some of the areas which I would give are, because the terrains may be very difficult for them not to go there, remote sensing and planning and monitoring is an area where it is applied extensively. I think the use of GPS allows scientists to obtain precise movement patterns of animals through GPS telemetry, where the animal location and its distance to survey sites can be quantified. And this has morphed to a 3 to 5 centimeter area, we can detect some of the movement of animals or poaching, whatever it is. Similarly, the thermal imaging and camera traps to combat poaching have become a go-to tool for conservationists, and the use of artificial intelligence and the machine learning has helped put together an enormous amount of predictive analytics as we go into the future. I think this is used for tracking, for example, the wildlife movements and species movements, and create an action plan which enables us to address the human-wildlife conflict. I think, but all said and done, we must know what is the problem we are trying to solve, because sometimes skilled and high-profile conservationists are themselves not very clear. There's an enormous amount of literature that is available where the conservationists can improve their logical model theories of change, or specifically their conservation goals and metrics. I think it's a problem that is limited by the political patronage in terms of corruption and regional politicians doing bad things, or the law that needs to be enforced at its past. So we must look at it in a holistic manner and totality, rather than just applying technology to a problem and then saying that the technology doesn't work or people don't understand the technology. I think we have improved a lot in gathering data and monitoring about the status of species and habits. But at global level, using the high resolution satellites and computing power to monitor in real time, very local change, either for good or bad, can happen. I think we can monitor remotely, and it's absolutely possible. And I just thought I'll make these opening remarks with regard to what can be done in the conservation, awareness of the conservation. It's a global problem, and it has to be adopted, and the evolution of the technology is almost in a phenomenal pace, and the adoption by the conservationists and the policymakers is absolutely crucial. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Ramadorai, I'm sure we will come back to some of these comments, and I'd like to suggest now Anish to make his comments.
Thank you, Dr. Bawa, for having me here. As Mr. Ramadorai has mentioned, technology has started playing a big role, and remember that these technologies that conservationists are using were actually developed for the military and the defense forces, and now they're doubling up as a means to understand what's happening with wildlife, with ecosystems, is also taking snapshots of habitats, and we can in fact go back in time to understand how historically human beings and anthropogenic pressures have slowly chiseled away the natural ecosystems that are around. And this is not just for terrestrial ecosystems. There is enough and more technology to look at the beds of rivers and also the seas. My organization, the Wildlife Conservation Trust, uses fair bit of technology to address the existing shortcomings or shortfalls or gaps that exist in the area. When we started, we obviously wanted to work on secondary data. We looked around, but we found that there was huge amount of gap in terms of good quality data collected with the right methodology organization, and we started collecting our own data. And like Mr. Ramadorai has said, we have used all these technologies to expedite the information generation, starting with the GIS and remote sensing teams. They have gone out and looked at large landscapes. But before I go there, let me just spend a few seconds to mention about the problem statement. Why is a conservationist why does a conservationist need all this information and technology? The biggest challenge, as you know, today is climate change. And one of the main drivers for climate change is the increase in carbon dioxide and the degradation of forest land. Increase in carbon dioxide is not that easy to control, but degradation of forest land, if we can stop all degradation, we can probably reduce the negative impact on the climate by about 25%. And so in India, that has about 21% of forest area, of which 5% of India, which is 1/4 of all the forest, is under the protected area network. A huge amount of forest, nearly 75% of what is classified as forest, is not really well protected. And that is where there is huge amount of pressure. Nearly 300 million Indians are dependent on natural resources from the 5% of the protected areas of India. When you have such huge consumptive pressure on it, even if our per capita consumption is far lower than the West, but because the populations are huge, collectively there is a huge impact. Unless you understand what are the drivers for that degradation of the forest, what is it that is causing fragmentation, and how can you extrapolate all that in the future so that you can proactively solve problems as they happen. And science and technology gives us that ability to see in the future. And that's the reason why the Wildlife Conservation Trust uses remote sense data from 1970s, since the time we have started getting the data sets on vegetation till now, to understand how the forests have degraded. We are also using large data sets on tiger through camera trapping. So we are camera trapping nearly 8,000 to 10,000 square kilometers of non-protected areas every year. And we are also taking data from the Wildlife Institute of India, who has a repository of tiger data sets. We are superimposing the image of vegetation with tiger presence. We are also superimposing that with the rate of degradation, fragmentation, the way linear infrastructure is growing within the country, to also look at night lights to understand how a small hamlets also impact of getting forest fires. So there are several, and that tells us the pinch points, the connectivity. All these national parks and sanctuaries are discontinuous blobs in a big sea of human existence, and we want to now understand where the wildlife is moving, what is the influence of humans out there, and which are those areas which are highly vulnerable now, and if it goes on, if business goes on as usual, what is going to happen in the future. And so we are able to come up with with models that can predict where the pinch points are going to be, and these are largely going to be areas where human wildlife conflict will go up, because the degradation has gone up, people and human have started interacting, and therefore there is a perception of threat from the animals. So an interaction between a wild animal and people is looked at as conflict, and that's creating huge amount of political pressure and also financial burden on the government. So we want to see how through our study we can predict where these problems are going to happen and advise the government to build capacity within their staff to set up remote rapid response units, start talking to the people so that there is a lot of these conflict and interactions are because of behavior. So we are doing a lot of study on psychology of people and then using that big set. So our data sets largely are say about 8,000 to 9,000 families and 800 parameters per family. So that's the kind of data set that we are handling in just one small area in Maharashtra, and that you cannot analyze without machine learning. So we are partnering with Google to see how those data sets can be analyzed and we can predict what's going to happen and proactively change the behavior of people, not by force, but by slowly spreading awareness. So I think the remote sense data is forming the foundation, and we are prioritizing our actions based on what the GIS is telling us, and also our government in strengthening on the ground. So that's my 7 minutes. I'll come back if there is time later. Thank you.
Let me intervene here before I go to the next two speakers. I think Mr. Ramadorai did an excellent job in painting a very broad picture. And I think Anish, you gave some very specific examples. But I think for the benefit of the two remaining speakers, and I will also give you a little bit more time to you, first to Mr. I, to ask, I think, a specific question. How can we strengthen the local capacity to gather information and use that information for conservation, for managing their local resources? I think we have all been reflecting during this crisis how to strengthen local capacity in a wide variety of ways. And I think that is that's a very, very specific question, and I would urge the next two speakers to discuss that. What platforms we can use? Are there good examples from other parts of India or from other parts of the world for really empowering local communities with the use of, for the use of these technology, for sustainably managing their resources, and for larger conservation goals? Mr. Ramadorai?
Yes. I think when you look at the local communities around the protected areas of the parks, I think the communities mostly are on subsistence economies. I think we need to address, they are the stewards of wildlife or natural resources in their backyards. And with the right tools, how do we incentivize them so that a combination of technology and human behavior, which is hard to predict but worth exploring. So education and skill and providing the set of tools, including the technologies from a very early stage, is the best thing. I think if you take simply, why do they go into the forest? Because their knowledge of the forest, knowledge of the habitat, knowledge of the animal behavior is very, very good. But because of the point I made, that's where they are going. So remotely monitoring and ability not to go into the forest, but the subsistence issue is addressed. So I think ecological and economy must go hand in hand instead of one the other one. That's the way I would put it. And also the mobile as a device, which is very powerful, and most of the smartphones are understood by these people. I think we can educate them or skill them through very easy applications in the local language, including gamification, and through thoughtful environments, which their knowledge is already codified as part of the backend, and then that is projected and reinforced on a continuous basis. That's the way the local communities to address this problem and have to be the fundamental stakeholders in this. All need to support them rather than say that we can replace them things better. That's not going to work.
Thank you. Anish, 1 minute.
Yes, rapid fire, 1 minute. So 65% of all Indians are farmers, 85% of all farmers are subsistence farmers. They hold less than 2-hectare land. So if India has to progress now, we cannot ignore the farming community. There is huge amount of inefficiency in farming. Technology can bring that efficiency so that we use crops which use less water, no fertilizers or no pesticides. We should also look at decentralizing industry now that people have moved back. Solar technology can help by decentralizing power. There could be small scale industries and technology. Again, all the products can be use of the middlemen so that the benefit and the cash flows remain local communities. I think the most important thing is that the cash flow stays within the community. Currently, most of the money is going out into the cities from the villages. We have to change that, and technology, I think, will play a very, very big role in that. My 1 minute is done.
Thank you, Anish, and we'll probably come back to you again. And so Irina, first Irina, and then Bramley. So if you could, both of you, focus on this issue of local empowerment, local capacity, decentralization of information, and use of such information. It'll be wonderful. Irina first.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to represent Earthbanc here today, and it is an online digital banking platform that exactly allows for access and monetizing of sequestered carbon in the soil and trees. So I'll briefly share, okay, I wanted to share my screen if the host could enable screen sharing. So the problems that we are facing are obviously very, very complex, and we need to look at holistic solutions. And while the technology is not gonna save us all, and while the technology will never be the silver bullet solution, it can provide one piece of the puzzle that can really empower sustainable transformation. And the problem that we identified as the team of Earthbanc, what the previous panelists also said, is that the majority of the world is being fed by the small-scale farmer, smallholder farmer. And the smallholder farmer usually has no access to carbon market and usually has very few opportunities to diversify the streams of income. And at the other side, we have consumers in the Western world who care about sustainability, who want to contribute to the change and who want to be part of change and be the positive force in the current environment. And usually these demographics don't meet, and there is currently for or like no mainstream or easy way currently for kind of Western consumers to meet with smallholder farmers, right, or help them directly in any way. And so that were the considerations in mind with which the Earthbanc has been created. Earthbanc, you should be able to see my screen now. Yeah. Do you see my screen? I think.
No. We
No.
don't see anything yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Projecting
Okay,
something?
great.
Yeah.
Yes. So Earthbanc.
Irina, we're not doing
Into the website,
right,
so
right.
I don't have slides. Yeah, so that's kind of the Earthbanc. I just want to show you how easy it is. It's the bank that is it's a digital banking platform that is on the phone's app. So just using a smartphone, which, as you mentioned, most people have in all the communities, people can access their banking in our partners in India, the smallholder farmer community, or anyone engaged in agriculture or climate positive projects can access loans at very favorable rates, but also people can deposit their carbon on the platform and get repayments from that carbon. So I'm just sharing to show that it's a very easy, very clean and community-friendly platform, and got endorsed from doing good as well. So yeah, the financial solution that we're currently working on. So it's the world's first 100% green digital platform that connects the Western consumer with the producer of food and goods, but also the sustainable stewards. As you know, we can't, like, people can't just actively participate in carbon market, because to even start talking about profitability of the project, you need a minimum size of the project, which would be thousands of hectares, so 2,000 hectares to just even start making financial sense to do something with your land for carbon credits. We use remote sensing and satellite data to then evaluate the carbon sequestration and certify carbon sequestration. And with this level of technology, and with this level, especially where the satellite technology is right now, we can look at projects of the size of 250 square meters. So from 2,000 hectares, square meters, that's a big change, and that opens up access to a lot more landowners or farmers who can now become participants of the carbon market, and who can deposit their carbon on the platform, get payment, and get rewarded for protecting the land. In the past, I worked in communities in Myanmar, and we also did a lot of drone-based work and information collection and mapping work. And the one important lesson that we learned is that if there is no sustainable economic model around the restoration, there will be restoration. And the number one priority that we want to address is exactly creating this economic model, making restoration profitable for the community, and making it sustainable in a way that the payouts for restoration work are structured, and the that people are really incentivized to not only just keep the forest or protect the forest because like they have to, or because but it's also about creating additional streams. And I believe my colleague Bramley will talk more about mangroves, but one example is about and creating sustainable shrimp and crab in the root of the mangroves. And this sort of helps for exactly this kind of ecosystem profitability, so that people are even more incentivized to keep the forest growing, because they can make more money from growing shrimps there sustainably. So yeah, we're looking for feedback on the platform, and we are open already for new users. People are welcome to sign up to the mailing list and start trialing and just start testing, because the sooner we start testing, the more we can learn, and the faster we can improve. So yeah, it already works in India, and we'll be happy to get all of your feedback on how you're finding it to use.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irina. I think Anish articulated the problem very well, and I think you have articulated the solution very well in terms of regulation and how to mitigate degradation. And I think you have also partly addressed the comment made by Mr. Ramadorai about the digital tools as well as incentives that are required at the local level to promote the use of technology for sustainable development. And so I'll come back to, I come to you, Bramley, now. Just 7 minutes, and if you can focus on the questions, that'll be greatly appreciated.
Sorry, my internet is very unstable, so if I turn the video, it might crash, so you just hear my voice. I'll be very quick and short. First of all, I'm very honored to have been invited by our friends and partners at Balipara Foundation. We've actually started a pilot to restore forests here. We've done like 10,000 trees between Meghalaya and Assam during the lockdown. But if there was no lockdown, probably we would have reached like 100,000 trees by now. So I'm looking forward to finding other ways of how we can collaborate. And that's why I brought on board Irina, because we've been working in the Sundarbans to restore and plant 750,000 trees and engage 23,000 borrowers from microfinance institutions in West Bengal, in that part of the world. And it was very important because when Cyclone Amphan hit us a couple of weeks ago, thank God for those mangrove forests that took the cyclone and broke it into two. So without those mangrove shields in the coastline, a lot of it would have been incurred by low-lying communities. So now we have to be careful for every tree we cut, the implication it would have on livelihoods, on infrastructure and coastline communities, because they are the forests of the tide. They are the living shield. They can protect against winds of 150 miles per hour. They can break up to 30 to 45 feet tall. And they can address 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's indeed the miracle that absorbs 5 times more carbon than any terrestrial tree and regulates the forest of the tide and provides multiple ecosystem service benefits beyond carbon. I saw some calculations assessing full-grown mangroves provide up to $200,000 per hectare per year of total economic benefits to an ecosystem. That's massive. It's only second to coral reefs, which is about $350,000 per hectare per year, and seagrass. But with mangroves, there will be no corals and no seagrass. So these 3 ecosystems in the marine environment are very important in our fight against climate change. As you know, oceans produce 70% of the oxygen on our planet. So if the oceans die, we humans and all species on Earth will be choked because of the rise of temperature. The oceans are absorbing too much of the carbon dioxide, and the bleaching of the coral reefs is happening. And if we cut down these mangroves, more corals will die and the entire ecosystem will be eroded, and we will have huge coastal erosion. But having said that, I come from Northeast India, so I've been working in the highlands here. So it's very important to also connect highland ecosystems in the eastern Himalayas. What's their role? From source to sea. So glaciers are melting down in the Himalayas. Some research say that by 2050, Everest might be a barren rock, and India might dry up into just a barren desert, and all the rivers will dry up. Can you imagine a population of 1.5 billion then or more suffering in an utter crazy drought? And if our monsoon fails, we're gone. So it's also our responsibility in the highlands to protect our ecosystems, our cloud forests. That's what Balipara Foundation is doing, and work with indigenous people who hold that knowledge for thousands of years and the way they've been living there, protecting them. And we should create some kind of a natural capital accounting, which can be integrated into the GDP of the nation state. I remember Joseph Stiglitz, whom I studied with, who was my professor at Columbia. He said the way nation states measure growth is totally wrong. We have to rewrite the books of economics because they do not integrate social, human capital, intellectual capital, and indigenous knowledge at all. It's just about oil and growth and extractive. That's how they measure extractive industries and oil-based economies. So if we were able to create an ecosystem service marketplace between different states in India, for example, Maharashtra could pay total ecosystem services for Arunachal Pradesh to maintain 70% of its standing forest and pay the people there to keep those forests standing because they're the wealth of the nation. So every state could have a natural capital budget to be accounted for. The states with the highest forests, the states with the best protected aquifers and sacred groves and tigers should be paid the most. I saw another research saying that for every rupee invested in a tiger, you get back 200 or 300 or more, depending on a survey conducted in different tiger sanctuaries across India. So a tiger is worth 500 times more than a tiger dead. The same goes for rhinos, the same goes for elephants and all beings that share this planet. So what right do we humans have to poach them and kill them for some sort of aphrodisiac or some crazy market that is controlled by other economies? So we know we can track these animals, we can trace the poaching, but until and unless we address the market and the demand in China or other countries, it's not going to stop. Because, you know, rhinoceros horns is worth $40,000 just for one horn. They've been slaughtered in Africa, in India and elsewhere. Unless and until we address the market where these horns are traded or the ivory, it's not going to work, because these poor people will do it and risk their lives because they think about their families, right? Survival. So on that note, what we've been doing in Myanmar with Irina, with the biocarbon engineering, was help map ecosystem services, create digital maps for the communities. We actually had to recalibrate our budget because when we consulted the local communities, they didn't want us to just fire the pots and plant seed pots with drones. They wanted digital maps because the government of Myanmar, the Ministry of Environment and Forests, didn't have maps. And these forestry management committees that have been given the land around the coast, they didn't even have a clue how big their land was, who's the next plot holder, and so on and so forth. So with Irina's team, we were able to scan the entire coastline and all the 5 villages with dimensional scan from drones flying at 2 feet above the sea, with high resolution photographs that you can identify the species of the leaf, and then print these maps and give it to the local community so that they can make informed decisions on how they can plant their mangroves, and which part of their ecosystem is damaged, which part is running off, which part the buffalo is coming, real time. This was like a miracle for them. We can't just forget livelihoods, because we need these women to also plant the trees. So the technology that we brought in has to help communities to rapidly restore ecosystems, while also giving them data of how they can consult with each other and scientifically use that knowledge given them to better manage their mangrove shields. So having said that, that same technology can help in carbon assessment, because we can project the growth models of different species of mangrove forests and how fast they grow and how tall and how resilient they are. That all can be calculated through the model Irina's team has been working on. So we don't have to spend money on expensive consultants coming from Europe and the US and have to pay for their flights and the hotels. The drones can do it. So we want to train all these young people in Burma to be drone pilots, and all these kids who have moved to the cities saw the drones with us. They started, hey, we want to come back to our villages. We want to fly drones. We want to be drone pilots. We want to help our community. It's like amazing space tech. So here we are talking about space to soil and soil to space. So I was very happy that we were able to convince the government of Myanmar to take us seriously, because there was no data. Then I did some research. I found a paper done by NASA using Jet Propulsion Laboratories, Delta region, where Cyclone Nargis struck in 2008 and killed almost 150,000 people. And using that paper from NASA, which was the reason for the law being changed, 13% mangrove left. That paper from NASA we were able to justify to the government that you need to legislate a law to protect mangroves under the Forestry Act. You need to legislate a law to give land tenure to people so that no, rich guys or people from the cities can just kick off little farmers and privatize the land and build their hotels there, pushing people to the fringe. So once the farmers, once the fishermen have tenure rights to the land, when they plant their trees, no one can kick them out. No project can work without proper tenure rights and protection of communities and livelihoods who live on the buffer zone of those high-risk climate zones. So that was just an experiment, but we were very glad that we've been able to now create a BCS of carbon credits from 2,200 standard, which is now creating 3.5 million tons of carbon or BCUs for the next 20 years. And then American, British companies, European companies can actually buy these blue carbon credits, which also measure the SDG goals and the whole parameters. And that money is then used for the broader sustainable development projects for the community in the long term. So I'm very happy that the government of Myanmar has legislated these two laws, because without the protection of land and without the protection of mangroves, this project would have not worked. So having said that, this link between mountain communities and the highlands, where we have cloud forests, coastal communities by the sea, are linked through rivers. Our rivers and our streams are the most important links between mountains and seas.
Can I interfere? Can you wrap it up? I think we are running out of time.
Yes.
We have already exceeded the time.
The end game is valuation of ecosystem services, of going beyond carbon. And this is where the debate should be looked at. How do we put a value on cloud forests? What is the value of that in natural capital terms? What is the value of mangrove? What kind of sensors do we put on the ground to measure flood resilience, storm resilience, saltwater intrusion in real time, feed into the Internet of Things with artificial intelligence to give it to the people on their mobile app so they can see their ecosystem in real time. Once we can do that, then we can pay those people who need the money for maintaining the integrity of these ecosystems, who risk their lives every day to protect their shield. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have run out of time. We are going to entertain questions now from the audience. And if we still have some time left, we will proceed with additional comments, which is very unlikely because we started 3 minutes late. And as I'm looking at the clock, I think we have 10 minutes. So Joanna, do you have questions from the audience, please? And again, I think I want to emphasize, we want to keep the focus on using technologies to empower local communities for managing sustainably the resources they have and fostering conservation, and using technologies that can establish link among policymakers, scientists, and the local communities. I think these are the two key points that are emerging. And I think we should focus on those. Joanna? Yeah.
Yep, so we have quite a few questions from the audience. In the interest of time, I'm going to pick 5 out of the 6 we have received. And to the person who has sent the 6th question in, we will circulate your question to our panelists, and we hope that they will be able to answer them or discuss it in a way that's interesting. India is home to 30% of the total organic producers in the world, but most organic farmers are struggling due to poor policy measures, rising input costs, and limited markets, says an ASSOCHAM study. It is not progressing well even in a state like Sikkim, which is 100% organic. So how can IT help with this?
Well, I'm not very familiar with Indian domestic policies, but clearly the creating alternative income streams, I think that's one area that we could look at. So taking the example of the Earthbanc, so if the farmer is truly an organic farmer, then he would qualify for a cheaper loan. So already there would be saving money on the kind of interest rates. And if the farmer can prove that the sequestering of carbon is taking place, so either it's agroforestry and there are trees intercropping, so if that carbon can be calculated and monetized, that's one income stream created. Or if you look at the soil carbon in general, there could also be ways to monetize that kind of carbon and create another income stream. In general, from again, from my knowledge of businesses working in India, there are now other companies who are proactively searching for organic farmers and organic produce, and they market it at a premium to high-level restaurants. So those are also online platforms where people can just start looking for opportunities and kind of participate in a more online marketplace. Yeah, so those.
Thank you, Irina. So the next question is an open question. I think I think Dr. Bawa, maybe you can suggest who can answer this. The question is, how can forest-fringe communities which are focusing on ecotourism as a livelihood option through eco-development committees, along with forest staff, get to benefit from technology, whether it is reaching out to visitors or assessing the forest and its resources, and of course to avoid human-wildlife conflict?
It's a complex question. I will address it in my concluding remarks. I'll just take a couple of minutes, to wrap up the discussion. So I'll talk about that. And why don't you move to the next question, Joanna?
Sure. So the next question is, what is the current strategy towards enablement of technology in preservation of ecology and biodiversity with specific reference to the northeast of India? Do we have a standard data regulation and protection control of our biodiversity landscape? Does the current maturity of technology capacity can address to restoration of wasteland and wetland management? So I think maybe we can split these questions. I think Bramley, you have some expertise with the mangroves to talk about wetland management, so perhaps you can field that question. And
I think Anish wants to say something too. Maybe part of that can be answered by Anish.
Yes, yes.
And Mr. Ramadorai as well. Okay.
Okay. I also wanted to say something about the previous question, because there was a mention.
Go ahead.
Human wildlife.
Yes.
Yeah. So we can talk from our experience that in parts of Vidarbha, where there is huge amount of interaction between people and large carnivores, it probably has the highest density of tigers and leopards outside protected areas, living in human-dominated landscapes. The conflict levels have gone up. There we have put camera traps with GSMs, and they are capturing movement of animals, relaying it through the satellite to the mobile phones of people, and the people are getting live feed on where these animals are moving, and see, it's not going directly, it's coming to the forest department, to our teams. We screen them because not all animals and all individuals are creating these kind of interactions. So when we know that a certain individual is responsible for more kind of conflict, we escalate that to the phones of all the people in the village, and therefore all they have to do is not get out of the village, and that itself solves the problem. Similar things have been done in a much more effective way with elephants in a place called Valparai, where the forest department and NGOs and individuals have actually created this kind of a system to warn tree planters and also villagers of elephant movement. So this is being done in a very effective way with certain species.
Bramley first, and then Mr. Ramadorai.
Yes, so right now we are developing a standard to go beyond the VCS to look at total ecosystem services benefits. For example, mangrove ecosystems, they produce a lot of oxygen. One tree produces enough oxygen for 4 people in its growth. And one tree also produces a lot of water molecules that again charts the entire ecosystem and the functionality of the weather pattern. So these are 2 things that we are trying to measure in the project in Myanmar for the last 4 years. So we need data to actually create a benchmark for the assessment. Next is to look at saltwater intrusion. How strong are the mangrove roots preventing the saltwater from entrant and so on and so forth. We know with sea level rise in the future, most of those low-lying areas where people are growing food and so on and so forth will no longer be fertile enough to grow food. So we're experimenting with saltwater uh, uh, food that can grow, like there's a saltwater asparagus, there's saltwater potatoes, there's sunflower seeds, and we're trying to see what species can grow, can still feed people in low-lying areas so they don't go hungry when saltwater intrusion does take place and when sea level rise does happen in the next 10 or 15 years. But until and unless we're able to measure these ecosystem services and pay these people who depend on these forests for firewood and for survival, these charcoal burners, and turn them around to be mangrove protectors and rangers, because I can't walk into a village and tell them to stop cutting down trees when they've got empty stomachs to feed their kids. We need to give them an alternative livelihood of creating efficient chulas that they can use, different kind of trees that grows fast in the mountains to cook. We need to give them solar panels to power their grid locally. We need to give them jobs to restore mangrove and pay them double of what they would get from burning charcoal. Only then the father or the mother will think long-term and have a long-term livelihood strategy for their families. Once you've got them, then you're hooked. Then you've got the community working with you. This is the way to do it.
Mr. Ramadorai?
Mr. Ramadorai, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I think a very simple point, this COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a disruption of unbelievable magnitude, and more so in India with the migrant workers. It's obvious that majority or quite a bit of the migrant workers are going to stay back in their remote locations, namely the villages, and they understand that ecology and economics very well. Having worked in the urban centers, their technology capabilities, whether in the manufacturing sector, service sector, have been enhanced, with the result, the ability to use the mobile phones or the technologies which are appropriate at the local level are going to be used for the benefit of everyone. If we give them the tools necessary to monitor the ecological degradation or ecological sustainability along with the economics which can be set up as the corporates or the MSMEs move to the remote locations, the new disruption can make a transformation where ecology and economics stay together. That's the point I wanted to make, and this is an opportunity we cannot afford to miss.
Yeah. So, Joanna, do we have 5 more minutes?
Yes, sir, we should have you.
Yes.
And
So
why don't you pose next 2 questions that identify the speakers, so 1 minute each, and then I
sure.
think I'll make a comments for a couple of minutes, and we can wrap it up.
Sure. So the next 2 questions, the first question is, how do we for community participation? I think, Irina, you can answer this question. And the last question is there a need to develop blue and green economy awareness in school curriculums in a cross-cutting way? I think Mr. Ramadorai would like to say something on that, and I think even Anish would like to say something on that. No? Okay. So, Mr. Ramadorai, then you can field that question for us. And I think we will have to wrap up. I'm very sorry to the person who just sent in a last question, but we will not be able to answer it because of the time constraints.
I'll be happy to answer the questions you cannot bring to the panel offline. So you can send me the questions and I will send the response to people. Okay.
Sure. Irina, I think you can answer the question about drones and community participation. How do we ensure that?
Yeah, so that basically, well, drones is a technology, right? And it can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Like a knife could be used for cooking or, you know, or destructive activities as well. So that is all about who has the technology and who has the power to use it. I personally am against kind of centralized approach where someone comes to a community, brings the tech and imposes it on people and leaves with the tech. So the approach that we're using now, and the project that I love very much, is called Flying Labs. So they're run by V Robotics. V Robotics is a Swiss-based NGO, and they have flying labs in each country they work with. And the whole ideology and the whole approach of flying labs is to find local pilots, train local pilots, teach local people, and give the technology to them. So the entire purpose of the NGO is decolonizing the technology. So this is the model that I know works very well, and the only model that I've seen so far that can really be sustainable and really not only invest in kind of technology adoption, but also increase community education level, skills level, etc. So I would recommend looking and using this model in general for any technology, not just drones. Thank you very much. And I have to jump on another call, so I'll have to leave you.
Thank you, Irina, for joining us. It was great
Bye.
having you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think, Mr. Ramadorai, now you can answer the question on a need for blue and green economy awareness in school curriculums in a cross-cutting way.
I think we are given a recommendation as part of the national education policy. The humanities program should be integrated with the main curriculum that is already there, and this must also become the main curriculum part. I think unless we start very early in the child's education and skills have to go hand in hand, and that must be propagated across. I think staying home because of this lockdown has sensitized a lot of parents across the country, how nature and the way we have played with nature, unless we understand it, coexist with it, we are not going to progress very far. The next pandemic is going to be worse than what we have seen today. So my submission is there is enough push to make this as part of the curriculum in the school education, and skills getting integrated into the educational curriculum itself.
Yeah. Joanna, I also wanted to respond to that, and at the same time, I'll try to wrap it up too. Mm-hmm. I think the last question which Mr. Ramadorai addressed is also very relevant to the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being that is in works now. And I think curriculum on conservation at all levels is a very important component of that mission. And new tools are going to be developed that would good digital platform that would allow us to assemble all the information, that will allow us to interact more with the local communities, sharing information. Information is power. And I think once the information is put together in a way that it can be used by all people, by the local communities, scientists, and policymakers, I think we'll be able to move forward. It seems somewhat ironic to me why there is no one place. Of course, there can't be one place, but still, few places where you can go and get this information. That portal can be reached by information that is coming from the field and can be shared and used very, very widely. It seems to me that that sort of approach could be very, very helpful. I want to thank all the panelists for participating, and I want to thank all the participants. If there are any questions, I will take the responsibility of answering and having a dialogue with people, and they can write to me at my email, which they can get from Joanna. Thank you.
Thank
Joanna,
you, Dr. Bauer.
Thank you
so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It was a really great session, and we really appreciated that you took out the time to be with us today. And thank you to all our attendees and to all the people who watched us live on Facebook. Please do join us tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you so much.